welcome back everyone to the end of episode Tea Party with me. Today we are covering quite a bit of things, from going over the red truths dropped by Beatrice and Lambda this episode to even the concept of magic. In case you don't already know, my name is Lorelei and I'm a vtuber who's been reading Umineko since October 2023. It's been a wild ride leading up to this point, and I hope that you'll stick around for more. I stream on Twitch every Friday or Saturday at 10 PM JST. There's a second channel where I sometimes shitpost, and we also have a fun Discord community for all your Umi needs. So, without further ado, let's just get right into today's discussion. Let's start with some general thoughts. I think that Battler makes sense. Honestly, his ideas and mine are pretty similar, and I think that if you've been following for my train of thought for the past few episodes, you kind of know this already and you kind of expect it. So whatever you expect out of Battler, you can expect that out of me as well. It might as well be said in writ that Lorelei is incompetent. But while we're on this topic, I will say that I will try my best to solve the Epitaph or the locked room. It's just not the main thing for me when I read the story. For me, I greatly enjoy Umineko because of how the characters feel and the story that it tells. I'm emotionally invested in them, and I want to see how they grow as the story develops. The story is one gigantic beast, and I sometimes get overwhelmed by the insane amount of information presented to us, so I hope that you guys will understand where I'm coming from. But in any case, in episode 4, it was really interesting for me because that's when the gears in my head finally started turning. I finally come to the realization that perhaps the culprits were changing throughout the game boards. Because before this episode, there was always that looming threat of that mysterious 19th person X. But at least now, we know for certain, or as certain as the red truth allows, that there are only 17 alive on this island. The 4th game board is also really special too, because all the murders took place on the first day alone, and I wonder what the significance is. As we go through the game boards from the first, or supposed first, to the current 4th, it seems to me that the murders get sloppier and sloppier, as if someone is getting impatient. And I guess that person is Beatrice? It's even more interesting because the supposed Beatrice definitely exist. Her handwriting can be found in Maria's diary and in a notebook page in the wine bottle, yet her identity is unknown. But it has to be one of the persons on the island, right? One thing about this episode I really enjoyed was seeing other parts to Kraus, really. They say that only in times of crisis do people's true nature come out, right? So, seeing Kraus sacrifice himself to save his siblings, even though they're always fighting and whatnot, and not just the siblings, but the servants as well, was really extremely admirable, I think. Instead of fending for himself alone, he fought hard to form words to tell the others to run away. And in this regard, Rosa also surprised me a little, because she tried to aid Kraus and put a stop to the madness instead of running away on her own too. So I really enjoyed seeing more of their personality shine through, and none of the characters are one-dimensional, and I really appreciate it. It was also really nice seeing Angie grow from someone cold-hearted and distrustful to one that can count on her friends, however real they are. I will be honest, the concept of magic still eludes me, even to this day. I'll kind of talk about Maria and Sakutaro first, and then just kind of explain what my general theory is. No matter how wrong it is, I'm gonna just explain it to you guys. But let's start with Maria, Angie, Sakutaro. So Maria was unable to summon Sakutaro because in her world, Sakutaro is dead. Maria had decided or accepted as a fact that Sakutaro is dead. And Angie even questions whether summoned beings have the concept of life and death. In Angie's world, perhaps because she had decided that it was only Sakutaro's vessel that disappeared, she was able to accept that Sakutaro is alive and summonable. As for what the nature of magic is, based on what I've seen so far, I want to say that magic is based on the concept, or rather, it's based on your imagination, in a way. When I see Maria, when I see Angie, the thing that comes to mind the strongest is the idea of imagination as creation, meaning whatever we create exists because we so imagine it to. Just like how an imaginary friend would work, I guess. I think this idea came to me because I do remember being Maria's age or younger, wishing that I had the ability or magic to do the things Maria wanted, like flying or conjuring up candy out of nowhere. All of it came from the power of imagination, but perhaps was also driven by feelings of loneliness and desperation. And in Maria's case, she desperately wanted a friend and her mama's love, but was constantly shunned and rejected by her peers and, worse yet, her own mother. So maybe, to me, the concept of magic is really the power of imagination. So in episode 4, we actually had a lot of red truths that were covered, like a lot of it, by Beatrice, by Lambda, and by Battler himself, of course. Let's go over some that I have highlighted over here. This list was graciously provided to me, and I've been referring to it as I need it as I go through the story. Don't worry, I never spoiled anything for myself. So I highlighted the things here in yellow. Let's go over number 2. 6 years ago, no person called Beatrice existed for me. This one, I just assume means that Beatrice lived by a different name. And on this one, I think that Battler has a sin, but this sin doesn't necessarily exist between Battler and Beatrice. I assume the sin could also be because this Beatrice lived by a different name. I'll be honest, I'm really just trying to cook some things up here. I really, genuinely have no idea at all. Although Beatrice is using the red truth to get Battler to repeat after her, I find it interesting that she could state it in red, yet Battler couldn't. Everything she says in red is the truth, but somehow stopped being the truth once Battler tries to say it. I know it's because she's trying to get him to repeat after her, but it's another one of those things that makes me question like the validity of the red truth. If everything is the truth, why is it the truth when she says it but not the truth when Battler says it, right? Over here, you are not Asumu's son. She somehow manages to state 2 contradictory truths in red. How can Asumu be Battler's mother but Battler not be her son? And moving on, we have this one. This is one that actually escaped my attention for the first time when I looked at it, but looking at it again, it's definitely interesting. Beatrice says, "This is my golden land, a world where magic that isn't mine certainly cannot exist." Yet Angie managed to use magic in her world. Does that mean Angie's magic and hers are the same? Or does magic, as I said before, does it just not exist? Angie states that it was the witch before your eyes that stole away her whole family. It could mean anything really. She didn't state Beatrice's name, although it is implied. And to begin with, since this Angie is from a different fragment, can this Battler even be considered her brother? Well, this is a rather cruel thought, I must admit. Let's start from the very first game where the red truth was laid out regarding second twilight of the first game, where both deaths were homicides. In the second twilight, and I'm sure you guys remember, is when Eva and Hideyoshi were killed. And I remember I was kind of throwing out some wild theories, and honestly, I don't know. I know I said one of them killed the other and then themselves, but this is denied by the red truth. And honestly, I also don't really think that Eva and Hideyoshi would kill each other, considering how much they love each other. But of course, in episode 1, I didn't know that. It was way more obvious after episode 1, especially in episode 3. But knowing what I know now, I definitely can say with certain that Eva would never kill Hideyoshi, and also the other way around. It would never happen, ever. But anyway, both victim and perpetrator being in the same room doesn't really mean anything though, according to this red truth. She didn't state that the victims were killed while the perpetrator was in the room. And in any case, I also think it's possible for the perpetrator to kill Eva when she left the room for a little while and then sneak an attack on Hideyoshi while he was defenseless. Because if you remember, Hideyoshi died in the bathtub in the bathroom, so he is definitely very defenseless. The question still remains though, how did the culprit construct the locked room with the chain still intact? Was the culprit still hiding in the same space without anyone noticing? That's a question. As for the next one, which is Kanon's death, they say everyone has an alibi, right? I want to say, how could Kumasawa have an alibi though? If I'm not wrong, she followed Kanon down to the boiler room, but the rest were either in the parlor or still a little further behind them than them both. I want to say that Kumasawa did it or that it was an accident, but that latter part was denied by Lambda afterwards. The stake was then placed by Kumasawa or someone else after the fact. Still, there's also the thing about the person that was in the boiler room, if you guys remember that. I still remember that. That is like the biggest reason why the 19th person theory was so very attractive to me, aside from the fact that I also want to believe in the good of the characters, but the fact that there was someone in the boiler room still really stunts me to this day. I want to say it's that person who killed Kanon, but still, who could it even be? And the next one is 50. I doubt Maria could have killed them, but what if they swallowed some sort of poison and the culprit, knowing this, chased them out of the room? The room being Kinzo's study, of course, where they all barricaded themselves up in. And then, well, am I saying Natsuhi is the culprit? I don't know, but she is indeed suspicious in Game 1. I will say that. She was like my prime suspect, even if I don't like suspecting her, but then again, it's like, could it be Natsuhi? But she's too obvious of a suspect, you know? But anyway, the sticks might have been placed by Marie afterwards, and in any case, we can always just ignore the sticks as a cause of death, I think. But what killed them? How did they die? Well, I say poisoning, but really I don't know. The last one in this case, Natsuhi's one. This one is probably the most mind-boggling one because Beatrice says that Natsuhi didn't kill herself, I believe, and it wasn't like a trap axe, and it was killed. Someone raised their hand and killed with a gun, but still, I don't know. This one, I really have no clue. And moving on to the second game, up here we have all the master keys were under Rosa's control. That one I don't really have an issue with. It's just a matter of like, when is it under her control? Because based on my own personal theories that I covered in, I believe, my Tea Party in episode 2, I really still believe that some keys were exchanged and it wasn't always gonna be under Rosa's control or scrutiny. Over here, number 76, the culprit, I think, killed the 6 in the chapel, probably with poison, then took their own sweet time decorating the place. That's kind of what I said too, I think. The question is now, how did they construct the lock rooms? Based on the red truth spoken by Beatrice, there is only one key. The key did not leave the envelope at all. No one was hiding. And so I can only come to one conclusion. At least at the time of writing this, I really could only think of one conclusion, even now, which is that the chapel was never actually locked and was only pretended to be unlocked by Rosa. Thank you, Battler, for the idea, I think. And although when I go back to check on the scene in episode 2, it appears the servants might have checked it first, I'm not sure if they really checked it. You know what I mean? So it could be anything. I can't trust anyone. It's so hard. The next one would be Kanon's name. This one is the biggest mystery to me because how? It's the same thing with Kinzo, right? He's dead, but how is he appearing alive to everyone else? So I'm sure the explanation is as simple as everything else regarding magic that has been happening, but I don't know. I don't know what it is. I still kind of stand by what I said in episode 2 regarding how the deaths played out. I really can't think of any other way. For this one, I just kind of want to talk about George's disappearance in the third game. How did he get out of there? How did he appear where he appeared? And like almost everything else we see in the game board, I feel like I can't trust my eyes these days. Really. Maybe George was never in that room with the cousins on the second floor. We see him, but what if he wasn't actually there, you know? Maybe he was already with Shen in the parlor before any of that took place. And I feel like with all the magic that we see, I know I can't trust it. It's definitely not happening that way. But when that question arises, it starts to make you wonder what else is being forged. What else is not true? What are you seeing that is actually just some make-believe Beatrice drew in front of your eyes, right? It's really hard to really believe. Everyone acknowledged that Kinzo was there, yet Kinzo is already dead. Did they acknowledge a corpse? For starters, only the adults ever get to see Kinzo. None of the cousins can ever confirm it. Well, not that it matters, I guess, whether Kinzo appeared at the conference or not. For real, I just find it really hard to trust. And this also brings up the question of Kinzo's appearance later on in the rest of the game. Is he there? Is he not there? If Kinzo has been dead all this while, then just who was talking to Kiria and the rest in a dungeon or in a dining hall for that matter, right? Since no one would ever confuse Kinzo for another. Well, it's true that Beatrice didn't deny Battler's claim that Kinzo is just a title that can be passed, although it's kind of laughed at by Lambda, I believe. We do see Kinzo, and the adults treating him as such. Was he there? Was he not? From the way Nanjo speaks to him and of him, it appears that it's the same Kinzo that Nanjo has been friends with for a very, very long time. But let's still not forget the shady conversation that Natsui and Kraus had, where both Nanjo and Genji are on their side. I'll be honest, I can't give any satisfactory answer to this. I have no clue. I really have no clue. And lastly, for the final part of the Red Truth that I'm gonna cover, this one, 43, I just think this means that one of the 17 people on this island that we love and trust is a culprit. And now begets a question, who is the culprit? Who is Beatrice? My god, I really don't know. And maybe even if Kinzo is dead, maybe there's actually more than one dead person, too. I want to talk about Kinzo first, because based on the Red Truth, we know that Kinzo is dead, I think. At the beginning of all the games, he has been dead. If Kinzo has been dead all this time, then the big question is, who was talking to Kiria and the rest in a dungeon, or in a dining hall, for that matter, since no one would ever confuse Kinzo for another. While it's true that Beatrice didn't deny Battler's claim that Kinzo is just a title that can be passed on, we do see Kinzo, and we also see the adults treating him as such. But, well, was he there? Was he not? From the way Nanjo speaks to him and of him, it appears that Kinzo is the same one that Nanjo has been friends with for a very long time. But let's still not forget the shady conversation that Natsuhi and Kraus had, where both Nanjo and Genji are said to be on their side. I'll be honest, I can't give any satisfactory answer to this. I have no clue. But I do want to reiterate that, well, I'm going to this expecting that what I see does not necessarily correspond to reality, whatever reality is. When we see the long drawn-out fights on the game board, I assume that it didn't necessarily occur the way it was shown. After all, that would mean admitting defeat to the witch and accepting her magic. And I'm stubborn, I don't want to do that. With a pitfall, as Kiria points out, the room they ended up in the dining room does not line up in size, I believe. Part of me believes that it really could have been pitfalls that Kinzo or whoever had constructed for this very purpose. Another part of me thinks that the victims were put to sleep and then made to believe they were falling, and then they woke up in a dungeon. The only problem really is that we have very little time pass between the put to sleep and waking up, and then ending up in a place that was supposedly 10 over kilometers away from the main mansion, right? But really, that's only according to Nanjo, who claims that the dungeon resembles the one, or insinuates at least, that it resembles the one in Kuwadorian. If that is true, how did it take Kraus and the rest so little time to escape from Kuwadorian, right? We see them running around the mansion, having epic fight scenes with the goat people. Did it take hours to get out? Probably not, right? It kind of felt like maybe someone could be misleading Nanjo by constructing an entirely identical room just a few minutes away from the main mansion. Who knows? I mean, honestly, who knows? Devil's proof and whatnot, right? Jessica knew that George's death was instant, as if she saw him being killed right in front of her eyes. Maybe George wasn't in the arbor at all and was killed elsewhere. George's body was found in the arbor, so there's no locked room mystery to solve there. Jessica, on the other hand, was found inside her locked room, However, like Battler says, as long as the culprit has the master key or even Jessica's room key, it wouldn't be a real locked room. But I do want to kind of go over what Jessica herself specifically says during her scene. She has a call with Battler over the phone in which she revives for a moment to speak with him and then relay important information. Aside from the obvious fact that a dead person can't revive after death, just personally, I just felt like I was unable to trust Jessica's words at the time because she kept telling Battler things along the line of how impossible it is to deal with the opponents and to not make the mistake of thinking that they are human. But when I heard this, I immediately thought back to the Jessica at the end of episode 1 where she tells Battler to not let the witch break his spirit, to deny and erase her. And I wonder what changed. Or really, my first thought was, is this even the same Jessica? Was she threatened? Or like Kiria, was she trying to convey some sort of message to Battler? But, kind of thinking about it over later on, I feel like, just gut feeling wise, I think Jessica is not a bad person. So I also don't think that she is maliciously trying to do anything to Battler. But at the same time, it might be too early to make that kind of judgment. Battler also asked if Jessica was killed on the phone with him. Jessica knew that she would be a corpse with half her head splattered out. Why? She probably already knew what the culprit's intentions were, as in just like how her mother went out, that her own corpse would be found definitively dead with no questions about her identity to be asked. If she knew the culprit, she didn't mention it to Battler, and to be honest, it's strange that Jessica didn't mention anything about the opponent to Battler, aside from the words demon and magic wielding, but in such a situation, I guess I can't really fault her. And as Battler himself examines the scene, he also notes that Jessica was possibly killed while on the phone with him, but that it didn't seem like the culprit was right in front of her eyes. Following Battler's line of reasoning, Jessica might have been dealt a fatal wound to the head, similar to half her head being spilled out, but it wasn't strong enough to kill her immediately. And with the last of her breath, she called Battler to let him know about magic and demons. Maybe because of all the blood that she was losing, she was hallucinating. But still, really, I think the important thing here, is that everyone else is also saying the same thing to the same effect, that there are demons, there are witches out there. And it begs the question, is there really a witch out there? And I want to say, no, there isn't. But I can't give any other possible explanation. Maybe it really was just some technological feat that makes them seem as if they are witches, but they're not. They're just people with access to advanced technology or something. Like Jessica, she seemingly died while on the phone with Battler. Her head wasn't smashed, however, and this is the beginning of the stakes being used. If the stake did penetrate to her brain, we can assume she really is dead. Similar to how Eva's head was pierced in episode 1, it raises the question of whether a human could drive a stake this sharply into the skull. To begin with, as difficult a maneuver as this is, it's likely that Kiria was already dead prior to the stick being driven in, which Battler deduces as well. And then, we have the question of what are the golden arrows Kiria is talking about? Like Jessica, she seemed to be saying some really cryptic stuff. Were they both trying to convey a message to Battler without the enemy hearing them? Is everyone just speaking in code? All I can think of is that she's referring to a gunshot. Now, I don't know any guns, nor have I ever been close enough to a gun to know, but I assume that the bullet's path might look like a golden thread, and that the keyhole is the gun itself. Maybe she was trying to say that she was being shot at point blank. Kenan is not outside a well, but he is found, or he is not found actually. He is declared dead in red, and he is stuck inside the well, so we don't actually have his body, but at least based on what the witnesses saw, he got shot through the chest with a hole as wide as a basketball. I really don't know. It seems like it is a gunshot. For Shannon and Nanjo, they died immediately outside of the well, but the stake that they were supposed to be stabbed with is not even pierced through them. It's just lying next to them. And to me, that kind of feels really odd because we know that or at least I feel that whatever is happening for a reason, and that the culprit seems to really love theatrics and putting on a show for people. So them not putting the sticks into Shannon and Nanjo kind of feels as if they're either really trying to rush through things and are impatient, or maybe they were almost caught and so they were rushing through it, or alternatively, that in and of itself is a message. Because as I was looking through the order of the deaths, as well as like where they should have been stabbed, it really did not line up at all. And it might be, I think, the first time that it has happened. Well, aside from episode 3, I guess, but episode 4 this time, where Cannon should have been stabbed in the head, Krause instead is stabbed in the head, but he is noted to be the 7th Twilight, where you're supposed to gouge the knee. For Kirie, it's also the same thing. She was supposed to have her leg gouged, but it was also in her head. And for Shannon and Nanjo, they were supposed to be stomach and chest, but the sticks weren't even rammed through them at all. So it really made me kind of think about what the culprit's intentions were, or is there something else that was happening? And also, I think I just want to point this out, but a powerful gun shot them, right? Why Battler didn't hear it, I have no clue. But thinking about this now, if it was a gun, where are the bullets? I'm actually kind of surprised. I have never thought of this before up to this point. But if the murders were carried out with a gun, it's kind of surprising that they have not found a single bullet whenever Battler is examining the scene. Did the culprit meticulously pick them off one by one? Or if not, was the actual weapon not a gun but something like a hammer smashing the victim's head open? In any case, I will say I still refuse to believe it's magic. For Kumasawa and Goda, this one is, I think, quite unique, quite different from the rest, since they did seem to have killed themselves, but in reality that wasn't the case. I think I've said most of what I wanted to say already in the video at that time, but to recap, Kumasawa and Goda could have easily stood up if they didn't want to die, and the nooses were also made at the height appropriate for them to just stand up. And remember that they were likely shot first before dying. So I proposed that they were forced in some way to be in that position on a noose and then shot after. As for how the noose was hung up, maybe they had to hang it up themselves. Maybe they were threatened. I don't know, but still, it doesn't feel... I don't think this is a real locked room. I genuinely still feel like they constructed it themselves and then they were killed from outside, from the window or something. It's not the first time we see him kind of die right in front of our eyes. We did see Eva kill him point blank in episode 3, but in episode 4, there's the whole fight scene between him and Beatrice. But I won't forget that Gameboard Peace Battler met Peace Beatrice in the mansion, and then they suddenly left for the Golden Land. So I want to say that Battler probably did die in the main mansion and not in the Rose Garden. And there's this really kind of cryptic line, or maybe not cryptic, but it was a line that gave me chills because he made a proclamation and then it says that his piece left the game board. And that gave me chills, really. This was so chilling to read once I had the opportunity to do so. The first time it flashed through at the end of episode 4, I couldn't catch it because it went really fast. But this reveals a lot about Beatrice's state of mind. She wants to die, yet she wants to kill, and she wants to love. And there's this strange duality in her words and a very heavy feeling of sadness and desperation. Based on what we learned in episode 3, it seems that Beatrice was trapped on Rokkenjima for years, unable to be free. The source of her pain appears to be Kinzo, yet her relationship with him often seems amicable, like that of an old friend, and other times even wistful, as if she has regrets in their relationship. But then she also, sets him on fire. But still, what does this have to do with Battler? What was his sin? What does Battler have that none of the other cousins have aside from having left the family 6 years ago? Although his coming back does seem to have triggered the murder, so maybe that itself is like an important point. All I know is to Beatrice, Battler has sinned. But this sin is one that she refuses to say. Maybe she wishes for Battler to be able to recall it himself. Did he make a promise to Beatrice 6 years ago and forgot? Last and sadly least, I am here to report that I have not made progress on solving the Epitaph. Sorry. In my episode 3 theory video, I did go over my findings so far. The adult's attempt at solving it in episode 3 was a great help, but I'm still very much lacking the ability or knowledge to solve it. Maybe with episode 5, I'll gain a clearer understanding and make more progress. But anyway, that's kind of it. Thank you so much for sticking around for the past year. Umineko has been a blast to read, and the community has been very, very welcoming. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it. I'll see you guys next time.